So you kind of, I suppose, laid down an ultimatum, in want of a better phrase, to say, give us 12 months. We're going to prove it to you in 12 months.
I think the challenge for us in that 18 months period was, well, how do we stabilise the service and the channel? How do we get people to really buy into this thing as the way forward?
So what you're saying there then is that some team somewhere was physically turning off the VA so that it was no longer available on the app, and all the demand was going to telephony.
I think we were, again, fortunate to have the opportunity to do that and really go all in and be like, give us that opportunity to make this thing work. And we can show you the benefits afterwards.
To Kane's point, if we can prove through some more complex, valuable use cases with the feedback, it kind of wraps it all together.
So 2021, 2022, it was circa 3 million chats both years. 2023 was then, right, we've stabilised. We ended 2023 nearly 7 million chats, 6.5, 7 million chats, which is a massive increase from the previous year. It was the first year where we didn't get switched off, which was always quite helpful. And then 2024 rolls around and it's, right, you've got some volume going in.
So that then must put demands on you, John. That's like, what's that, like a 5x increase in 3 years? Thanks for joining me, guys.
Yeah, no worries at all.
Good.
Nice to be here.
Nice one, yeah. Feels like a long time coming.
Yeah, indeed.
It's been in the works.
Yeah. Maybe it might be worth for those tuning in to begin with a bit of an intro in terms of you guys, what you do at Lloyds Banking Group. Certainly for those in the US that might not be as familiar with Lloyds Banking Group, it might be also worth setting a little bit of context around what the organisation is and all that kind of stuff. So should we start there, Ken?
Yeah, of course. So yeah, I'm Cainan. I'm one of the senior product owners in conversational banking at Lloyds. I've been in the team for the past 4 years, I think it is now. Prior to that, working on pretty much every journey in the app as a product owner, from payment statements to access, logging in, that type of thing as well. And John, yourself?
Oh yeah, so John, same area. I look after the kind of data and AI side of things. So more on the tech side, been in the space since 2017, 2018, about then when we were trying to get stuff kicked off. So a long road. But
Yeah.
And I guess LBG itself, probably the biggest financial services company in the UK. We've got almost 27 million customers, pretty much a relationship with 1 in 2 UK households. We now have almost 22 million app users. So
Wow.
The digital strategy has really grown from when I first started in the group 10 years ago to where we are now. Most people will be aware of like Lloyds and Halifax as kind of the key brands, but we've got lots of other brands as well, covering all types of financial products. So Lex Auto Lease for sort of car leasing, Scottish Widows, people may know of as well, and then MB&A being kind of the big credit card only brand that we've got. I think within our team itself, John mentioned, but very long journey, probably 9 years ago when the first virtual assistant, as it was created. Historically unloved,
Right.
and then
we tried.
As they sometimes are.
yeah.
Yeah.
A few of us joined the team 4 years ago to try and change that, and we went from a team of, I'd say, maybe 10 colleagues to begin with, very disparate model across the group, so no one really wanted to own it, and we tried to make that change. We've now got about 100 or so colleagues within the team, building all sorts of conversational experiences, both deterministic and now on the generative front that I'm sure we'll come to. We look largely after sort of the retail side of the group, so whether that's app, desktop, public website, that type of thing. We've got a few smaller teams then in the group that look after the likes of commercial, for example.
Yeah. Interesting. So working on the app then, so you were working on the app, so the VA would have already been in existence then during your time working
Yes.
on the app, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah. And John, were you involved right at the very, very beginning?
Pretty much. So I joined the teams working on it kind of early 2018, and it was late 2017 we were doing the first kind of small scale customer pilots, I think on Boss public site at the time. So yeah, we spent a couple of years kind of building the foundational platforms, trying to get to a kind of solid base from an engineering stance to enable the scale. But yeah, it was really when we came across focused really on the retail proposition. So we set up the infrastructure for retail, commercial, few internal use cases as well. But then really doubled down in 2019, 2020, early-ish, and then probably a bit later when we got that kind of organizational buy-in to really start to scale things. Yeah. And that's where the big step change in, I guess, belief in the channel starts to come at an organizational level.
Yeah. Interesting, because what's quite interesting is as AI has become in the last 3 years everywhere, it feels as though like now everyone knows about AI. You know, our parents and grandparents are talking about AI. You know what I mean? And so for many people who've come across AI in the last 2-3 years, and even those who maybe began working in AI or investing in AI in 2022 when it started all happening, it feels as though for those people, they've got a lot of experience because they've been working on it since the beginning. I saw clips online of I've been working on AI since the beginning, 2022. but it's interesting that at an organisational level, you know, it goes a lot further back than that. Yeah. And obviously the tools that you had access to at that point were not the same tools that's available now. But it's just interesting for context to, for people tuning in who are maybe a bit newer into AI that, this stuff's been going on for a long time. And what was it like then there's two worlds, isn't there? There's pre-ChatGPT and post-ChatGPT. So the pre-ChatGPT era, if you like, of NLU-based VAs and assistants, you mentioned it wasn't receiving much love. What were those early years like on the VA?
I think, do you want to cover pre-me?
BC
is before Kane.
Yeah, BC.
Or GA for the golden ages.
Yeah.
It was a slightly weird one. It's a weird, very small team. It was maybe a couple of dozen people working across the underlying infrastructure platforms doing let's go for on-prem apps to launching in the public cloud, as well as doing the kind of conversational journeys on retail, commercial. There's 3 or 4 other kind of smaller areas in the bank, and it was an interesting project that within the teams we kind of got the point of, we saw it, we were interested, but there always felt like there was a level at which people kind of thought they're doing that in a corner. And it's not going to touch the likes of telephony or public site for how people get in contact and get the support they need. So it was within the teams exciting. It's the reason personally I've stayed in the space for so long is the blend between tech, data, the psychological element of natural language plus design, which back then wasn't much for focus on design, frankly. But it was that blend of things which makes the space really interesting. But it's trying to get other people all the way up to the top to recognise that was where we struggled.
I think some companies, loads of companies are still in that phase, to be fair. They've had a chatbot for a while, sitting there almost like an appendage on the website, doing, little has changed over the last 2 years or so. And those teams are having the same sort of dilemmas, really, which is like, how do we make this the thing that it could be, which is arguably the interface to all things. But at the moment, it's a chatbot in the bottom right-hand corner of our website,
And I think also a lot of business cases were overly bold in promises, right? It was, huge demands going to be taken out. It's completely substitutional demand, which, what we saw is that's absolutely not the case. It's not every one chat you have is one less call you get. There is an element of that which has formed the foundation of, our long-term business case, but it's also about having the right contact with people at the right time and enabling fundamentally humans to spend more value-add time with customers.
Yeah. And then I think for when I first joined 4 years ago or so, the first 18 months were pretty challenging and very different to what I'd experienced previously as looking after some of the journeys in the app. We were getting switched off constantly in that first kind of 18-month period. And that, I used to look after payments. There was no way we were going to switch payments off in the app. And I was now in charge of this thing where it was getting turned off because we were really busy in telephony.
Right.
And you have almost a safety net to some degree with telephony, where it's performing really well, it's got really good CSAT, and you've got this thing that's, generally speaking, being quite underloved and not really worked on too much, that isn't performing too well. So let's migrate the demand from there to this thing that works, which is quite a difficult one to kind of take in as like looking after the product that's no longer on some days, which is, it's quite an interesting way of doing it.
So what you're saying there then is that some team somewhere was physically turning off the VA so that it was no longer available on the app, and all the demand was going to telephony, which is the channel that was deemed to be actually the working channel, the highly performant channel. Yeah,
so we would quite often be in sessions where that decision would be made to protect the telephony service. And at the time, it was correct because we had a chatbot that wasn't working too well, that had been historically underloved. And you had a telephony service that was performing really well. And then I think the challenge for us in that 18 months period was, well, how do we stabilise the service and the channel? How do we get people to really buy into this thing as the way forward? Which I think we managed to get to in the end, but it was 18 months of, really working closely with John and the engineering team on what are the basics, because I'm brand new to this thing. I don't know how NLU works. I don't know how chatbots work. So yeah, really trying to get into the covers of that. I know you said some bold use cases, but we did spend quite a bit of time thinking about how could we prove the most value in the short term. What are the things that we could do to be like, hey, this thing can work and it can be good. So we went after just ingesting basic account information, helping people with things like decline codes, and that is a lot of the demand that was coming in was around some of those basic things to start with. And then being able to show that back and be like, hey, look, now we've at the time increased containment, or we've increased satisfaction here, or we've done X, Y, and Z. Those were the kind of hard yards that we did at the start to try and get that buy-in to just not get switched off. I think we saw every time we got switched off, your CSAT goes through the floor, and the recovery of that is really hard because you might have had a really good experience with the customer one day, the next day they come back and it's off, and they're like, now I've got to call in and I'm not going to use it again.
Yeah. It's an interesting one because some of the stuff you talk around, right, knowing what's going to be valuable for the customer in a world where you're coming from someone in a team really close to those app journeys and all that customer data probably seems obvious, but I think that was one of the big pivot points for some of the team who were in a central team trying to build a platform, who then moved closer to the business unit. You get this wealth of data where it's your trade-off, right? So you centralize stuff at an organizational level, you get more reuse, you get a broader understanding of, how a multi-service platform gets used. But you're so far from the data, it's really hard to make decisions that are grounded in value for the end users and then ultimately the business.
Yeah.
And that's super beneficial, right?
Yeah, 100%. And it's funny looking back at those early years, and we call it within Lloyds, we call it fulfillment journeys. And they're essentially where we ingest data from host systems and we act on behalf of customers. And I was actually looking back through some really old documents, and we called the first couple of use cases, we called it KIC, which was customer in context. I don't know if you remember that. But basically, it was just us trying to work out who they were. Right. And it was greeting them, it was knowing their accounts, it was talking to them in a more contextual manner than what we'd ever done before, because it was all very bank process, FAQ, you said this is what we think, but we don't know anything about you sort of thing. And now we look at kind of where we are, 3-4 years on, where we've got connectivity to 10 plus systems, and we're performing really complex asks and demands for customers that back then we thought, telling someone about their account opening date was the best thing ever, because we'd never done it before. And it's a very different world now.
But it's interesting because, again, these lessons are lessons that today, because I think that what exists today, I think in a lot of businesses is enthusiasm. So perhaps what you've gone through in terms of taking something that was unloved to get it to a point where it's, almost a star of the show, really, isn't it? I mean, today, you'll get into what it's doing today, but today it's performing a mission critical role. You couldn't necessarily, you couldn't hope of turning it off now, could you? It would cause too much of an issue. So going from a place where it's underloved to a place where it's mission critical, is where a lot of, especially, applied AI teams want to get to, and that's where businesses want to get to, because if it's mission critical, it must be doing something that's of tremendous value.
Yeah.
So I think the enthusiasm to get there is there now, because, generative AI has now caused every boardroom in the world to be like, what are we doing about AI?
Yeah.
But the lessons that are being learned in the creation of today's solutions, I often think, are lessons that have already been learned from teams that have been doing it before. So you mentioned there customer in context. One of the biggest trends in AI in 2025 is context engineering. It's all about that, understanding who the customer is, contextualizing the responses, being more personal. But it's like, that's the stuff that was in process a long time ago,
And none of that's new, right?
That's what I'm saying, yeah.
How do we actually get to an answer? How do we provide the right words? Sure, we've got different methods to do that now, but what makes a good conversation in a more human way hasn't changed at all. It's just, in some cases, slightly easier to provide a super fluid, natural conversation. Flip side of that is it's then much harder to evidence, to govern all of these things that in a heavily regulated space like FS healthcare is hard. So it's the overarching, what are we aiming for in the chat? Maybe that doesn't change. How we get there and the risk, the trade-off, what is difficult about getting there, that's where it's kind of different.
How did you go then as part of that journey in terms of, turning it from something that was unloved to something that is great? Essentially what you're alluding to there is essentially you invested a lot of time and effort to make it better so that you could prove that it's performing better.
Yeah.
How do you go about doing that when, as a business, to use your words, it wasn't loved? So can you talk a little bit more about some of the, over and above just increase in capability, like what were some of the things that you had to do to get it into where it is now, which is that kind of mission critical service?
I think there's a couple of things from, like, when I first came in, we worked really hard to get the right buy-in further up the chain. So I think without that, it would have been, frankly, impossible to do what we did. We also spent a lot of time learning what had happened previously, working very closely with John, the engineering team. And then we invested in design. So there were no designers in the team when I first joined. We've now got a team of 18 designers within CB. And at the time when we were really trying to scale the capability, I think we probably had 6 or 7 designers working on what we call like customer in context, but all these other fulfillment journeys to try and really improve that. And then you see the metrics come through. And whenever we launch one of those kind of data ingestion fulfillment journeys, we see incredible levels of CSAT, 85, 90 plus all the time. And then it becomes easier then to have those conversations with the other stakeholders and get that buy-in further, because you can just go, okay, well, look what we can do if you give us a little bit more of this, or if you let us go and do X, Y, and Z. So I think the buy-in and working really hard and doing that kind of like stakeholder management upwards was really, really key. I think really understanding the level we were at from an engineering perspective, but also, how classification was working and or at the time how it wasn't working, and then really investing in those basics. And then the design element was really key. I think those 3 things for me were pretty big at that time.
Yeah, I think the one key build I'd add as well is we put a lot of time into recruitment. Yeah, I know you said we scaled the design team, right? But from when the 2 teams we were in previously came together, we went from a team of, engineers who were fresh in without, much experience or kind of leadership in that space to, okay, let's build a team, let's focus on what are the skills we need for the future, trying to define new career paths for people in roles that didn't mean anything to the bank. What is a AI engineer? What's a cognitive engineer? However we frame it, they were meaningless as words. So it's trying to define what they are. To Kane's point, if we can prove through some more complex, valuable use cases with the feedback, it kind of wraps it all together. Yeah. And to be fair, we did also make some big bets in the selling up the line of, okay, we will prove a point in the next 12 months. So we went quite bold on, give us 12 months. Here are going to be the proof points. Here's the team we need. Basically, give us the shot to prove it.
Yeah.
I think that going all in thing is really important. It doesn't work if you just keep switching the service off, or if you keep like not investing in the right places. I think we were, again, fortunate to have the opportunity to do that and really go all in and be like, give us that opportunity to make this thing work. And we can show you the benefits afterwards. If you don't have that, it's quite hard.
Yeah.
Because like I said before, you could have a really, really good experience one day with a customer. The next day, if they come back in and it's not working the way they think it's going to work, you've lost them then.
Yeah.
It's really hard to get them back.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the same could be true of generative AI, to be honest, because one day it might answer one thing, the next day it answers something quite a bit different. Even if it's still the right answer, maybe there's a bit of a detail missing, or something like that, which gets challenging. That's interesting. So you kind of, I suppose, laid down an ultimatum, in want of a better phrase, to say, give us 12 months. We're going to prove it to you in 12 months.
Yeah.
What were some of the things that you were using during that time and maybe even beyond then to demonstrate that value? Like what does success look like for Lloyds Banking Group as it relates to the VA?
There were a few things, and we can maybe go through the differences in like kind of the metrics and the things that people cared about over those years, because they were very, very different. I think at the time we were really, really focused on like understanding, stabilising the service, getting the basics right, and then showing things like, if we talk about like classification and recognition and things like that, it was how are you reducing your null intents and what are you doing to make sure that those things work? What are you doing to make sure that service is always 100% or as close to as possible? How do you make sure there are no defects going through to production? And then how are you showing that? Once we'd done that, it was then, right, build the capability out. And that was through some of the customer context bits and some of those data ingestion bits that we worked on. But it was also then, for us, the big metric change was like push the volume in for the first time. So 2021, 2022, it was circa 3 million chats both years. 2023 was then, right, we've stabilised. We want to try and now get people in for the right demands where we can help and start to put things like contextual entry points around the app. So we have really good journeys, really good digital journeys in the app. The app itself is very feature rich, but there are failure points in some of those journeys. Change of address being an example, 95% of the time it works perfectly. There are some edge cases. If a customer has a specific use case or indicator or something on their account, that's where messaging can then come in and support. So it wasn't necessarily get them into messaging and contain them within the VA. It was get them into a channel that can help them within a few minutes, whether that was in the VA or via an advisor, and really push the volume in for that right failure demand. So it was really stopping that demand ever going to the phones and bringing them into the messaging service, getting them used to it, getting them sticky to the channel, and then maybe they try us again. But looking at those like digital gaps and those failure demand places to push people in. We ended 2023 nearly 7 million chats, 6.5, 7 million chats, which is a massive increase from the previous year. It was the first year where we didn't get switched off, which was always quite helpful. And then 2024 rolls around and it's, right, you've got some volume going in, but then how do you contain people in the channel? So we really focused hard on those data ingestion pieces, those fulfillment bits, and optimizing those and doing more of those things, ingesting as much data as possible to have good conversations with the customer. And keep them in the VA and not have them hand over to those advisors. This year then has then been a flip again to be, right, we've stabilised the service, we've got our entry points, most places in the app for those failure demand points. We've started to contain some more customers in the chat. I think last year we did over 10 million chats last year. Now this year it's satisfaction. The big one for me is satisfaction. It's we've done all of those things. How do I make sure that they're having in my opinion, a better experience than on the phones?
Yeah.
So we've, for the first time in sort of the past like 9 months or so, built out a lens of the roadmap, which is very specific on those CSAT drivers. What can I do to pull out more and more and make sure the customer's having a better experience? We're on par with telephony, but I want to be above and better because, customers are getting to stay in their channel of choice, which is great for them and great for us. But if they can still have a better experience on the phone lines, then I'm not doing my job as good as I would like to do.
Yeah, 100%. That's a great story. And as you're scaling through those numbers from 3 million a year to 7 million a year to the last number you said was what, 10?
Yeah, so last year was 10. This year will be over 15.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that then must put demands on you, John. That's like what's that? Like a 5x increase in 3 years?
Yeah. Yeah.
So how do you handle that?
So there's a few dimensions, right? There's overall platform stability. So our stack is a combination of third-party suppliers plus some custom build orchestration layers. So all of the fulfillment, the integration to the back-end systems, both reading of data, writing of data. We've got an automated process for cancelling cards. It was no digital pathway to do it. People had to call up. So, to Cainan's objective of make it a better channel than telephony, we had no hope, right? We see sadly, we see no those in demand. So all of that is we need loads of integrations, which is multiple APIs, multiple teams to get on board with, okay, what's the service level you're going to sign up to? So we've got a whole stack on public cloud. So we've got some scaling. We've got kind of elasticity broadly by default. But there's also a cultural element, right? So we want to get through more. We want to deploy loads more valuable change. How are we doing that whilst holding our teams to a good standard of the number of bugs we get into production? If we see them, how quickly are we remediating those? So there's a few dimensions to it that are quite hard, but it's also, to a degree, there's an element of how do you build the team to find their own niches, right? So, we spend loads of time on understanding and classification, and that's been quite an interesting evolution of tech. So we had the original LLM models, they shifted to foundation models. We have secondary LLMs there helping. So we went from, what was it, roughly 1 in 5 chats not 20%. Really being understood, which is pretty bleak, right? Yeah, we can cut it how we want. It's not great. It's not good enough. And now we're sitting, fairly stable at the moment in the region of kind of maybe 6 or 7%. And, we've built some tools with some LLMs on it to really dig into the nuance of actually there's 2-3% of that is kind of noise we're never going to solve for. So our relative population that we're not understanding and not treating is now a fraction of what it was. And that's what's the culture of innovation we want to set. But actually, what's been the big focus for me is it's a great, interesting space for LLMs, Gen AI. There's too many people doing some really cool experiments and then saying, yeah, great, what's the next experiment? Whereas, I'm more interested in great experiment. How do we get it out there in production, serving 20 million people at scale and delivering value? Yeah. So,
I think, the level of pilots and stuff like that, or what they're calling pilots, I don't know whether they're pilots or proof of concepts or prototypes half the time, but there's obviously a lot of activity going on in the generative AI space. And I think that what you guys did to get to where you were in, the last couple of years, pretty much really riding on NLU, wasn't it? The Gen AI stuff is fairly new in terms of the capabilities. Is that
we've
right?
had the classifier.
It's a mix.
Yeah.
So I guess it depends which year's version of AI do you want, right? If you want the current hype, AI is now only Gen AI, then it's more recent. Yeah. But we set off a kind of team on its own probably about 6 months before ChatGPT launched. Really look into what we could do, and that was mainly your models like BERT, which are kind of open source. We hadn't made any strategic decisions as a bank, so there's the realms of governance, but it's we went quite heavy on open source early. So the kind of backup classifier we're out and running by I think mid 23, which really helped that step change down in kind of misclassified chats. I mean, that's a small model running on Kubernetes is 150 quid a month. And yet the delta change in 5-10% of chats we don't understand as a cost to serve is tens of thousands every month. And so that's, sure, we could go to a ChatGPT, a Gemini, etc. it's going to be a lot more expensive. Are you going to get any more value? Do you need frontier models? And it's those pragmatic steps of, okay, prove the capability big, and then basically play a game of Jenga, right? Keep taking out model sizes until you break the capability. That's the model sizes you actually need. So there's one of the guys we work with, his phrase always used to be word Jenga when it came to kind of conversation design. Keep taking words out until you break the meaning.
Yeah.
Similar approach on the model sizes.
That's very interesting. That's a good approach, that, to be fair. So when you said that backup classifier, for clarification for people, you mean essentially when the NLU fails to classify something, you go to that LLM-based classifier. Yeah. And for £150 a month, it's ended up having the equivalent value of tens of thousands of pounds because it's mopping up essentially all the stuff that you weren't classifying before.
Yeah, and it's super low risk in the grand scheme of things. I think we didn't have anything generatively customer facing at that time, but what we had was something that would try to classify the demand when the NLU couldn't, and it would always still ask the user, is this correct still? And it's a huge impact.
Yeah. And I think that's broadly been our approach, right? We're an oldish bank with, that kind of big bank reputation. So there's always going to be an element of, what's a cautious approach? So it's what are the use cases which are low-hanging fruit, either from a complexity or a level of risk. So it was teams within, or tools within the teams, right? So how do we dig into, NPS and feedback, either from the App Store or that we get in chat to help uncover what are the problems we need to solve, what's most prevalent. Then it went on to how do we, automatically create and label test sets. Really painful for those who have done it, really boring, but really crucial for training models. And it was, 80% reduction in time to get to 1,000 test data points. Relatively simple, pretty much no risk. And then we've kind of stepped it up over time. So we've, shifted to frontline agent augmentation. So giving them summarized views of the chats. There's a kind of other department in consumer who's launched kind of if you think of Google search at the moment, you get a little kind of generative summary and then you get your links. We've done similar for colleague knowledge. So for frontline agents to discover what's the right things they should be saying, what's the right advice. Again, human in the loop. And then this year we've stepped up for the kind of couple of first generative, no human in the loop with guardrails out to customers. So
right, interesting. That's a great evolution. So let's step through those again then. So we began with a backup classifier, and we've kind of established that that's been a huge help in terms of classifying those that weren't classified before. The second one you mentioned was labeling training data, was it? Or was the one before that? So a mixture of that and kind of feedback analyzer tools. So that's kind of text analysis clustering. Yeah. Not the super sexy AI we see on LinkedIn, but the practically useful stuff in the real world.
Yeah. We had like training utterance generators and things like that as well that were massively important. We still have teams of analysts, but having something where you could say, give me 100 ways that someone could say I've declined my card or blocked my card, and then all of a sudden you've got 100 training utterances that would have maybe taken you days to find in conversation review. So things like that were like really key for the team in terms of efficiencies. But there's maybe a common theme in terms of how we approached some of the stuff, even whether it's conversation design or whether it was fulfillment, whether it was some of the stuff in the Gen AI space. It's like we were trying to get the buy-in for all of these things all the time. So we were looking for those use cases that were small but impactful and maybe a little bit lower risk than diving in at the deep end and trying to do something that was completely generative. And showing the worth to everyone, getting value to the team or to the customer, but then also getting value back by showing the organisation, hey, look, this is having a really big impact here. We should do more of this.
Yeah, and also in terms of like building maturity, it allows you to just take one step at a time rather than trying to fight the world and have all of a sudden like, the VA is going to be end-to-end generative AI and we're going to completely redo everything. Yeah. It allows you to focus on, okay, what's our approach to prompting and testing and stuff like that? And then how do we, get something, an itemized bit of something that works, as you said, John, rather than, an experiment that looks promising. taking something from that to production in a scalable way, and then you can sort of build on that for every new use case, can't you?
Yeah, I think one of the other big things, and it ties into your point around the design team that we've grown, I can't, like the amount of value we've gotten out of some of the design research sessions we've done. So bringing customers in, either putting concepts or prototypes in front of them to gauge their reaction. Because, you probably more than me, you really dig into that, like, what is it that the customers actually want? At the end of the day, it's a guess, right? Often a good guess, granted. I'll give you some props. But
an informed assumption.
But until you put it in front of someone, there's been as many sessions we've been surprised at what people haven't liked versus what they have. So it's
interesting.
Yeah, it's something we've doubled down on recently in terms of the number of researchers within the lab as well, to try and get through more, particularly in a world where we're looking ahead to what does the next evolution look like.
What's an example of some of the stuff that kind of end users weren't particularly keen on? Can you recall any specifics there or not?
Yeah, I mean, to give a bit more context, when we do our sort of data ingestion fulfillment type journeys and features, we always run with kind of a full design process where we're really looking to understand, shape that custom problem at the start, then run these design research sessions. But sometimes those things will be face-to-face in customer labs. Sometimes they will be almost like anonymous surveys where we put things in front of people and be like, what do you think of this? They might not know it's Lloyds, but they'll see the thing that they need to work through. I think we always see a difference in opinion, let's say, on language that we use.
Right.
People don't want some of the fluff. They want it to be straight to the point.
Right.
So you may find sometimes, depending on, and I think it does change depending on who you do interviewing, even where in the UK you do some of the research, to be honest. But you get a very vast difference of opinion in terms of language that you use. And whilst we may sit in a room and think that sounds really good, that sounds very conversational and great, and actually put it in front of people and they're like, just tell me what it is. Like, just tell me how I do this thing. Like, I'm not interested in all this.
Just give me my bank balance.
So I think the language is the big one. I think the other one that I see time to time is just we're in the detail of the app every single day, and we work with a lot of the teams in Lloyds, because anytime they're changing journeys, it can have an impact on the VA in terms of what we need to be telling the customers. And we might think that an entry point or an icon or something visible on the screen is really visible and quite easy for people to kind of spot. And the amount of times you'll run through design research sessions where they haven't noticed at all, and you have to prompt people. I think that for me is always quite surprising. And we're in the weeds all the time, so we're looking at this thing and we're like, this looks really, really easy to find and discoverable, and and actually it's not. And working through that in the conversational interface that we've got access to is sometimes quite hard to make sure that it is as easy to digest and understand and view as what you think.
There's a really great book that I read years ago, and I think it's called something like Big Red Fez by Seth Godin, and on the front cover is this monkey wearing a big bright red fez. And the whole book is basically about kind of like online people are so distracted that you have to make it as blatant as a monkey wearing a red fez. And if you think that just this button down here makes sense, then it needs to be to the point where being blatant isn't enough. Which is really interesting. That's kind of stuck with me the whole time. But what's interesting, I think, in terms of what you're saying there about user research and customers having different preferences for the use of language, given that essentially the VA and all conversational interfaces are essentially just language. Obviously they're evolving now, and so multimodal is a lot more kind of, or becoming more common, where, multiple inputs, multiple output modalities, and I can see that kind of evolving. However, still a conversation is predicated predominantly on language. One of the kind of claimed benefits of generative AI, in fact, the research papers would suggest that this is the case. One of the research papers recently found that GPT-4o, when given a personality, will convince nearly 80% of people that it's a person, basically it's passing the Turing test, which means that essentially they sound great. However, when you're saying there that different customers prefer different experiences when it comes to language, and because we're highly tuned for language, because we spend our days exchanging language, how do you reconcile generative output that might sound convincing but might not square with the expectations that you're learning from customers that want it to be a certain way? Because now you don't have control over the output, but you still have the expectation from the customer. So how do you sort of reconcile those two things?
Do you want me to go with some bits first? Or?
Go for it.
So I think there's a few nuances to it. I think John might cover some of the stuff that we're learning in maybe the new world that we're moving into. We've had really good success from a customer experience standpoint on what we call kind of like repeatable patterns within the VA. So whilst every intent is different in terms of what it's talking about, you could be talking about changing your address or decline card or whatever that might be. We worked really hard with the designers to come up with a list of things that happen most times you come into the VA. Mm-hmm. Welcome messages, digressions, mirroring statements, handing off to a human, quick reply menus and carousels and things like that. And actually, that can be quite difficult then to try and implement consistently if you're doing something generatively. So from my point of view, I think for the large majority of kind of our key servicing needs that we have right now, we will stick to kind of the way that we're doing things and the success that we've had by implementing a lot of these really good, positive, repeatable patterns that we've tested with customers and that work really well and that people find helpful, let's say. Mm-hmm. Where I think it's then difficult, and what John will probably come on to, is the way that we're trying to maybe reinforce some of those things and reinforce the brand tone of voice through prompting and through some of the work that we're doing in the generative space. I'll probably let you cover how that's working and how difficult that is.
It's been interesting. So let's give too many spoilers. We've got the first kind of big kind of customer facing agentic piece that we're working on at the moment, which we'll see how we'll see where we get to in terms of performance, in terms of when we may launch that. But one of the things we've tried to approach it with is kind of this concept of having a kind of separate entity that's job it is to redefine that kind of brand ethos all the way through. So thinking about, equipping an LLM with what our brand guidelines are, but also what are the things, to the chat we were having earlier, of what are those core parts of a good conversation, regardless of the tech you use, and trying to give that as a kind of design ideology to then say, okay, you might have come up with what the answer should be, but now this is how the answer should be. Yeah. And it's trying to work through how much of that in a kind of multi-prompted turn, how much of that do you need to reinforce every time you call a model? Mm-hmm. How much of that can you take as just a complete rewrite at the end? That's where kind of we've been doing a lot of learning over the last kind of couple of months in particular on that. And I actually haven't spoken to you about this, but we had a really interesting conversation, I think it was last week, with some of the guys at Raza. So we were having a chat with Alan, the CTO, who I think one of the points that we came away with is, knowing the people that were there before ChatGPT hype get that kind of ethos that comes through regardless of the tech. And it was quite validating in terms of the way they're thinking about some things and the way we're thinking about it, in terms of trying to almost map your deterministic world to a generative world, both with kind of functionality, but also that design element. It was quite vindicating because we're thinking about things in a very similar way. So it's, you lose a degree of certainty, but you gain a bit of fluidity and hopefully something that's more close to something totally natural that you do human to human, or something where you can really tailor more easily to the individual. So, I would love a world where we could stand by a kind of rewriting in brand tone of voice, but also to all the weird northern quirks you throw out there, I sit there and don't have a clue what you're on about, right? So that's the thing that's quite exciting in terms of a look forward, is we can actually start to make it really personal, where, I'm not really interested in the fluff that you were saying. I just want the answer. I want to keep it really simple. But someone who maybe it's their only human-like interaction they'll have that day, the fluff's really important. And that's where, we don't have a duty to do that, but if we can, great, let's do it. If we can make someone's day a little bit better, why not? That's where I get quite excited about it.
I think it's just that you've got to try and keep that consistency throughout all the sort of conversational experiences. So we've got some things that work really, really well. This can definitely complement, if not add, even more to what we've got. But keeping that the consistency throughout, I think this is really, really, really key. And it's not an easy thing to do, to make sure that every single time the customer has a conversation, that we are using the right tone of voice, that if we do have a need for them to rephrase, that we're doing that in the right way, and we're doing it in the way that we know customers want. We're not using all the fluff all the time. We're talking to them in the right way. I think that's the really interesting one to try and solve.
How do you? It's interesting though, isn't it? 'Cause I mean, I'm a huge fan of Raza, and Alan's great. Like, I think their methodology around, or at least the framing of how they approach the problem, I think is great. Which is around, like, the only thing that changes in every conversation is language. The thing that doesn't change in every conversation is process. So the process should remain the same as the language, what changes. And I think that's a really interesting area for generative AI, understanding, generating, and also the dealing with the complexities of language, which I suppose academically you might call it like the primary conversation skills. If I say, what did you mean? Can you repeat that? Can you explain more? I didn't understand. Or all those kind of things that you need to deal with, which I think was what you were getting at with some of these patterns that you kind of figured out, like the carousels for this type of use case and buttons for that type of use case, etc. But I think that what you were getting towards the back end there of consistency is a very interesting conversation, because what does consistency mean in a generative AI world? Does it mean consistency over the facts, as in every time this thing generates a response, it should be exactly the same? Does it mean consistency over tonality, so it should always sound like this because this is the way the brand is? Or does it mean consistency as in adaptability? So you might expect something to be straight to the point. I might expect something to be a little bit more kind of chirpy and verbose or whatever. So do we want personal consistency? Do we want brand consistency? Is consistency in the fact? Is it in the end-to-end journey? How do you think about consistency now in a probabilistic landscape?
I can give my view. I think a little bit of everything that you've said. Definitely from my perspective, the tone of voice, that tonality piece is pretty big. Lloyds is a huge corporation, massive in the UK. We can't have it talking to people in not a Lloyds way. So I think that is a really, really big one. And it's one I know that John and team are working through and battling. And it's something that we tried really hard at over the last few years, moving away from being like very bank process driven with the way that we talk to people, to giving this thing more of a Lloyd's tone of voice and more of a conversational tone, and being a lot more customer first, rather than just, I can see that you've got this decline code, that means you have no money. Like that isn't a good way to speak to anyone, but it is how it was working to begin with. So I think that one is massive. From a personalization standpoint, I think that what we're trying to do at the minute is, by ingesting all of this data, ingesting all of these things that we know about you, we can start to proactively speak to you about certain things, whether that's in app, whether that's via a push, whether that is at the end of a conversation when you've already done your demand for maybe some smaller things that we could talk to you about. And at that point, I think we are, just from a deterministic view, we're kind of playing around with how would we speak to you if it's something that we're trying to catch your attention for, which is a bit different to what we've done previously. I'm not sure if you just let the generative model run away with stuff right now, how that would work, but it's an interesting one for us to dive into.
Yeah, it is, because I think that I'm always interested in this concept of, like, the right tool for the right job. If you're going to build a house,
Yeah.
you don't walk onto a building site with a hammer and try and hammer everything together. You need the right tool for the right job. So coming from the last almost decade of working with conversational AI solutions, as I mentioned, I think that we have the benefit of hindsight, the benefit of the experience gained prior to generative AI. Now with the tools that we have to our kind of availability, the world would have you believe that everything is Gen AI, and that's the way that it's going to be. And to do some of the stuff that you were kind of alluding to earlier, at the beginning of the conversation, you ingest my data. So you know what accounts I've got, all the details around the accounts, if I'm overdrawn or if I've got a loan or if I've got a mortgage and all that kind of stuff. Perhaps you've got data on my previous activities. Maybe I called you 3 days ago about a loan and now I'm on a chatbot. And so is that relevant? And so one way of kind of dealing with the problem is to have a very specific, methodical, kind of rule-based approach, which is this is the information that we care about at the beginning of every conversation. And depending on a bunch of factors which we're going to calculate and compute, we're then going to begin the conversation in this way. Very, very not simple, but easy to understand way of making something personalized, which is begin the conversation contextually to my profile. The new, I suppose, school of thought is that just give all that stuff to the model and let the model understand where the conversation is now. So where do you sit in terms of like choosing the best tool for the job?
Yeah.
I think we have a very shared view on this one. I'll let John take it.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I feel like I've spent quite a few years trying to get people brought into this really exciting world. And I feel like I'm almost, my role is somewhat changing slightly to try and warm people off it by any means, but try and cool some of the excitement, right? Because it's, our experience has been very much, you can throw it all out there, you can get something out. It's not going to be something you want to do and really put your brand name on, right? So I think part of the problem is we're not comparing like for like. So we see this a lot of conversations we have either direct with customers or sometimes when we're talking kind of macro strategy is the benchmark is always ChatGPT. And it's, what does that model do? Is always the question. And it's not a model. That's part of the problem, right? There's so much, like it's an entire app stack where a chunk of it is deterministic. So, I mentioned we're trying to work up a kind of agent-based solution, but that's not, end-to-end, only Gen AI, completely autonomous. That's layers of determinism at the top, some determinism at the bottom. So guardrails, an interesting one for Gen AI, right? Most people default to LLM as a judge. So you've got models, marking models. And I always think of a very specific Family Guy meme, which may not land, but it's a truck being delivered on a truck. And then how do you get the second truck? It's like, well, you have a truck. Yeah. And it goes on and on. I'll send you a clip. It's great. But there are certain things. So identifying prompt injections, right? So when people are trying to game the system, if you do that with a model, you're just passing the risk to another model. There has to be a different methodology. It has to be some kind of, classification or strict logic, in which case you've got a generative system that has non-generative parts. And that's definitely how we see the world going.
Yeah.
There are industries which may be able to take bolder steps, heavily regulated and fundamentally quite important to people's day-to-day lives for, me and I think you and others. It's not the space to be just saying, throw it all at the model and let it figure it out. Particularly if you're talking, so we've split some of the risks, particularly in an agent world, into kind of autonomous reasoning and autonomous action. So, day one, we're focusing on the autonomous reasoning. So have the model do what they're good for, fluidity of chat, right? But to your point, don't make it autonomous for the business process, right? Autonomous action, let's see where we get to. The jury's slightly out.
I think from a cost perspective for us as well, we've built a decent enough chatbot over the last few years that can do quite a lot of good stuff now, fairly cheaply. If we think about how we're actioning some of our fulfillment journeys, it would be quite silly of us to just get rid of all of that tomorrow and say, run with it. Like it wouldn't make much sense. So I think there are use cases and parts of our overall, I guess, conversational experience that we're looking at. How could you complement with some of the generative side, or what intents, for example, could you get rid of that then might make your core model even better than what it is today? I personally don't see a world where we just stop doing all the fulfillment stuff that we've done now and throw it at something else.
Yeah, there's a kind of like, for me, it feels a little bit like there's almost like a throw the baby out with the bathwater type of mentality going on, which is like, you know, we've had a chatbot for a while and now we're going to rebuild everything to be agentic, without real consideration for what you should keep and what you should, you know, try to improve.
Yeah.
And given that most of the businesses that are exploring generative AI are not doing so with any particular outcome in mind, which is why so much fails. They don't know how to measure it.
Yeah.
So it's almost like we've got this chatbot. We don't think it's that good. We're going to turn it all into an AI agent and hopefully it'll be better. But by what measure?
Yeah.
And why should that change? Right?
Yeah.
Your business goals haven't changed.
Yeah.
How you're delivering it might. But I think that's why people are losing sight of, you know, we need to do something totally different, to your point, but what's the end goal? Is it not the same?
Yeah.
Is it not fundamentally create experiences that are useful and hopefully good experiences for customers?
Yeah, exactly. How have you approached that kind of the idea of getting the organisation on board? I mean, maybe you don't have that problem. Maybe it's that, you know, the AI bug has reached Lloyds like it has everywhere else, and everyone's like a license to experiment. But obviously, in your case, when you've got 20 million app users, that's 20 million potential chat users every single time someone opens the app. And as you mentioned, John, this is stuff that is, you know, foundational to people's lives. It's where your money is, it's where your house is, it's where your car is, or whatever. So the risk of getting something wrong is quite high in your case, certainly higher than many other businesses that don't have quite as many customers, etc. So how do you, in the same ways you had to kind of prove to the business, give us 12 months on the chatbot, we're going to turn it around, and in there you can point to very specific things like, have we impacted the calls, have we increased satisfaction, have we helped get resolution? How do you kind of like quantify what success looks like when you're exploring Gen AI to justify it to the business?
Yeah, I'll probably go on that one. So I think, you know, in a slightly blunt view of the world, we've got some different leaders right at the top. So all the way to the very top. So Charlie, the CEO, he's very pro-digital, pro-conversation, pro-AI, again, for the right reasons and in the right spaces. But we've also, I guess, made some organisational shifts over the last 18 months or so. So we've got a new group director in specifically for AI. He's, you know, I think just into his second year with the group. So the first year, we were talking about this the other day, actually, the first year was all around building buy-in. So 2025 is the first year the group's ever had a board metric for value delivery through AI.
Wow.
First time ever. Now, value will come in different forms. It might be revenue generation, it might be cost save, etc. But it's putting a focus right at the top for something we're going to commit to the market, we're going to commit to the board, and that then cascades all the way down the group, right? So it's, you know, next year it's going to be a punchier target, and it stages up over the next few years. So it's really going to be focused on, sure, let's enable people to go and experiment, but actually if we're spending a bunch of money as a group, where's the value return? And I think it's been easier this time around because it hasn't just been kind of us pushing up. We've had kind of top and bottom, hopefully meeting in the middle. I don't know what you found. I've certainly found it's been a different attitude this time.
Yeah, I think for sure. I think touching on when you said the bug, I think definitely most people in the group have the bug. Coming back to that consistency point for me is the big one. It's fine to do experimentations, to have a look at what a conversational experience could look like in mortgages or insurance. But how do you make sure that as a customer of Lloyds, you have the same, you have the same experience every time you come in.
Yeah.
I think that's the tough one when it comes to the bug.
Yeah.
Because it's very easy to just be like, oh, this is the fancy new shiny tech. We should be doing something in this space. But then you don't want 10 disparate conversational experiences showing up in the app.
Yeah.
I think that's the one, and I know you're involved, John, more broadly with some of the broader like AI leadership communities within the group, and that is like definitely like a talking point.
Yeah, and I think where you made the point earlier, right? We've got a brand reputation, and one of the things that goes in our favour, you've got the likes of Monzo and Revolut. They're scaling quickly. They've got less legacy infra, so they should move quicker from a tech front, and often they do. But we've got scale, we've got brand, we've got trust above the door. Doesn't really take a lot these days to break the trust with customers. And that's either kind of slightly janky experiences, it's, mad news headlines that we've seen over the last couple of years. So there's definitely a view to be bolder than maybe we have been traditionally, but there's also a view on like, we are a big bank, we are trusted, we can't throw that away.
Yeah.
Because that really separates us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it puts a focus on, responsible AI, doesn't it, really?
Yeah.
And that's kind of what the whole purpose of it is so that you can leverage the innovation, you can get the value from it, but you do it in a responsible way that's doing the right thing by our customers, doing the right thing by the business, etc. What are some of the things then that you're sort of looking at now? Like, what does the next sort of 12 months look like? If you had another 12 months like you did before, which is give us another 12 months and watch what happens, like what would the next 12 months look like then for?
I think like we shared the shared view of the blend between deterministic and generative, and that will continue and be stronger and in a better position than what it is right now. We will get to the bottom of exactly when we want to do deterministic and when we want to do generative. I think it's still a bit of a debate across not just our team, but broader in the group. When is the best time to do that? In my ideal world, we'd have a more kind of unified help and support like proposition within all of our digital channels. So we haven't touched on this massively, but the idea of kind of the customer coming into a single interface and getting the help that they need. They might not necessarily know whether that's from the chatbot. That might be from, it might just be a telephone number if that's the best place for them to get that support. And having a world where AI helps us to route the demand to the right place, whether that is a feature in the app, whether that's an agent that we've got, a chatbot, whatever that might be. I would love us to get to that position. Yeah, next year. I think that would be, my view.
Yeah, completely agreed. And I think we've got, not many of the competitors have the same kind of interesting, but I think good setup on. We've got a broad help search feature in the app, right? So it's kind of a global search, mostly navigation, and it's the role of search is changing. We're seeing entirely new browsers, which are not really search. They're more of a chat. So customers' views in their day-to-day lives are changing. So it's us thinking, how do we do that propositionally at a group level, cross-channel, to your point, Cainan? That's really interesting. And also then invokes what are the team topologies we need? How do we need to think about, team setup, skills, trajectories, 6, 12, 18 months down? And, we've been having some interesting conversations on, how do we face into, our COO wants us to be the biggest fintech in the UK, right? That's kind of the aim. So our whole approach to, tech talent also to a degree has to change, and it's changing slightly. So it's that side of it I find quite interesting, as well as the proposition side. But completely agree.
I think like what we're seeing, we've been doing some research over the last few months on some of the bits I've just touched on in terms of that like view going into next year, and it was the first time where the large majority of the customers was starting to move from saying, no, AI is still a little bit scary for me, and this new world's a bit scary, and it's not for me still. I don't want to give my data away and all this sort of stuff. It's the first time this time where pretty much everyone was like, yeah, I know it's here and it's staying, and I need to understand it and understand how it can help me. So I think we see this, it's becoming increasingly embedded in everyone's lives, whether it's, you just use it instead of Google, which some people mentioned they did, or whether you use it to kind of improve your efficiency in whatever job and role you do. People are starting to get it a lot more. So I think that we have to have it more embedded into the way that we're working and the features and the journeys that we're delivering, because I think the expectation will be even further ahead than what it is today if we're talking about the next year.
100%. There's some really interesting research done by a few companies where they found that when they implement generative AI in their chatbot, even though the customer might be having their experiences shaped by ChatGPT, prior experience of bad experiences on the chatbot in that company means that it's hard for customers to try it again.
Yeah.
So that's one kind of thing. I think fortunately you guys are in a good position because your VA is doing well anyway, but I think a lot of other companies are in a position where the VA has been doing terribly. Now they've got it working pretty well, but it's hard to get adoption. But then second to that is that, yeah, you're right. The more customers and people use AI in general, the greater the expectations is of the VA. And at the same time, if you're kind of go upstream, you're trying to go upstream in terms of like working more and more and more closer and closer and closer to the first screen in the app, so that eventually, potentially, it's a chat interface. As you do that, the scope of questions and queries broaden. And if the expectations are rising at the same time as the queries broaden, you need a lot more depth in terms of that capability. Because if a conversation is the mutual quest for understanding, it's no longer really good enough, or won't be, as the customer experience expectations keep rising. It won't be good enough to say, I understand what you're saying about your credit card.
Yeah.
I'm not
but I can't do anything about it. Because otherwise, if the capabilities don't go along with the increased understanding, it's just it's a different way of saying, I'm sorry, I don't understand that, isn't it?
Yeah,
definitely.
But I think that triage-based angle is a good angle, because at least initially from the outset, you've got a way of helping people, and then you can increase the automation over time, which is good. Two final questions that I thought would be interesting to ask is, the first one, if you had a magic wand and you could do whatever you wanted to do, let's say that, technology capability is there, customer acceptance is there, business willingness is there, all that kind of recipe for success that you need to be able to do is there. What's the one thing you would do tomorrow to improve either the performance of the VA or the experience that you're offering?
Big question. Have you got one off the bat?
I can run with it. I think the thing I would wave, maybe because it's one of the hardest problems to solve, at least for us anyway, is a kind of true bank holistic approach, right? We still operate the channels relatively independently. We've got, a load of different mediums that are established or becoming established. I'm not a big metaverse person, but I can genuinely see some interesting angles for, the need and demand for things like branches has reduced, but there's still a need there. Mm-hmm. So how do we evolve what that proposition is? How do we bring, chat in the app, be it I chat and I type or I talk, closer to the telephony? So if I could have all of the data in one place and I could have a kind of unified architecture such that I can create a journey once and have it published, in the app, on a website, in chat, ready for speech with all the kind of nuances of different cues, and you get, the tells, you lose all kind of sentiment and style in just plain text. So having a kind of audio or visual element to that would be really cool. I don't necessarily want like a meta Cainan running around, but I think
nobody wants that.
Yeah, one's enough.
Yeah.
But no, I think it really comes down to kind of one data landscape, and then you start to get that real consistency for the entire group and the various brands. and you don't have to deliver it X many times across, Y many teams in the group.
Yeah.
That would probably be the thing I solve.
Interesting. That's a big thing.
Yeah. yeah.
You said I get a magic wand.
Magic wand. Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough. What's your magic wand?
Well, that was huge. So I'll maybe if I bring that down a little bit smaller, I think the biggest customer problem that I've not been able to solve as good as I would like to so far is how I can really support with transaction queries in the best way possible. We have done a lot on. I mentioned things like decline codes. We've ingested some transactional information. We know about your accounts, and we know if you've got indicators on your accounts, and they might be prohibitive in terms of fraud, or they might just be that you need to update your address, for example, those types of things. But I still think we haven't done enough yet on that, and I would really like to dive into. We've talked about this, I think, in some of the sessions that we've had, really being transaction-led when a customer comes into a conversation. So I know everything about you. I know everything about this transaction. I know if you've made a similar one in the past. I know if this is really out of the ordinary for you. I know if you haven't made a refund or claimed a refund in the past year or two. I know how long you've been with the group, and then I can make some decisions for you. Can you self-serve this? Can I give you a refund within the VA because you meet certain thresholds? Those types of things, I think it would be really, really huge, and one that's on my list to try and resolve next year. A little bit smaller than trying to change the whole organisation, but it's always been a really big customer problem. We've burnt it down a little by little with things like credit balance refund and direct debit indemnities and ATM disputes and things where we've knocked a little bit here and there off that overall pie. But that one for me is a big one.
Yeah. Interesting. Both of them related to data, really, aren't they? Which is the magic secret sauce in all of this stuff is the data.
Yes. Yeah.
Last question then is, if you could go back and redo anything, what would you change?
I'm happy to go first.
You get it.
So in the same vein as kind of what I just talked about in terms of transactions, I attempted to get some data that would help me to do this a few years ago, and it wasn't that successful. So we weren't able to query the system in the way that we thought we could. We weren't able to get back some of the data that we wanted to get back to have then the next conversation with the customer or give them the next best action for whatever they were doing. And we did spend a bit of time trying to get hold of that data, trying to interpret it, trying to work with it, and in the end, we don't really use it too much today. We use it in a couple of conversations that are very, very specific, where actually what comes back from that system isn't as important or as necessary as maybe what it would be if we needed it in other flows. So that for me was like, if you going back, or call it a mistake if you like, or something that I've really learned from, was really understand the data source and really understand what you can get from that data source and how you can work with it. Before diving in and trying to make it work. Yeah,
nice. What about you, John?
I was listening. I should have been thinking. I would probably, when we spoke about the kind of origin story of us coming together, I would probably have pushed a bit harder on some of the organisation design around it. I think we still have partner teams we work with from, where we stood up some of the infra. It's still shared across different divisions of the bank. And I think the propositions have probably diverged strong enough that we don't need to be as tightly coupled as we are from a kind of technology perspective. And we probably could have gone a bit faster than we have over the last probably particularly year or so. And I think the balance of when you centralize versus when you decentralize is hard. It's a balancing act, but that's maybe one we didn't get right.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, guys, thank you so much. That was a really, really interesting conversation. It's great to see, a company that's kind of gone from the very beginning through the NLU phase, had some challenges in terms of organisational acceptance, got through it, got to the point where it's working really well. Now you're into the kind of generative AI landscape. You're doing tremendous volume. and all that kind of stuff. So it's a great example of what you can achieve with perseverance, and when you apply yourself to it. I think there's a lot of companies now who've either got a chatbot that's kind of lacking a bit of love, or maybe they're thinking about, we've just got to go all in agentic and that's all there is to it. But I think that a good grounded perspective from people who've kind of been through the mill with it all is really good. So thank you both very much.
No, thanks for having us.
Nice one.
Appreciate it.
And thank you all for tuning in. We'll see you again on the next one. Cheers. Bye now.